So I was asking you before, I've learned about the Manipura Chakra is called the bejeweled city, and that I've also heard that the ego, we want to get rid of it, or, it's not a good thing. But if it's actually called the bejeweled city, is the ego or the personality not supposed to shine?
Right. There's quite a few points in that question. So I'm going to try and start at the beginning and see how far we can get. First of all, the first tenet that I understand in yoga of the yamas and niyamas, as according to Patanjali, is ahimsa, which is non-violence. So any languaging around getting rid of the ego, killing the ego, is not what we're about, right? It's not the point, right? You have to have an ego to be in body. And the ego needs to be in right relationship. And I think this is the part that's really challenging, because so many of us are functioning only from the ego's perspective, that any change makes the ego feel like it's inadequate, or it's not purified enough, or it's not good enough, which is just all of the woundings of the ego, right? So a couple of things. I like to think of it like this. The soul, the jivatma, okay, lives in a mansion. And the jivatma has, this mansion has a butler. The butler likes to think it's the master of the house. The butler wants everything done for it, right? Wants all of the blessings given to it. Wants everything to walk through the front door. The butler needs to serve, right? That is the dharma, or the duty, the right action of a butler, is to serve. And that is when the household flows well, is when the butler, who is really the head servant, actually is able to direct all of the senses and direct all of the more minor energies of the human conscious experience to be in right relationship for the act of service. When the ego wants to be the master, that's when you get conflict and dharma, which means not in right action, and that creates ownership and tension, and forgets about being a servant, and then everything gets really dusty because nobody's cleaning, because the butler's like, why should I clean? I'm the only one here, right? But the fact of the matter is that when the butler can come into right relationship with the household, which is to be of service, to be the front man. It's the person that opens the door to the outside world. It's the thing that people see. It's the person that people interact with is the butler. It should be, the ego should be sattvic, should be pure, dressed well, speaks properly, acts properly, but does not act like it's the master of the house, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, is really an important understanding about why the importance for karma yoga. And I think this is something the West really hasn't grasped its brain around very well yet. But it's connected completely into this question because of Manipura Chakra being the jeweled city, right? And you're absolutely right. It is the jeweled city because it is your place of power, but it's not the place of the ego's power, right? When we are identifying, when we're moving through the world to the outside world from the place of the ego, which wants to shine, its energy, right? It needs to eat, it needs to be fueled. And that fuel comes from the outside world, and it comes through the outside world in thank yous, in accolades, in money, in power. It comes through the outside world in wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be special, wanting to stand out. All of these things fuel the ego, right? It needs to feed off something. And so it's constantly looking to the outside world for that validation of its existence. Okay, yogis, as it is my understanding, is that we come to a place like ashram so that this these accolades, these thank yous, and oh my gosh, you're so wonderful, and look how well you've done, and all of this fuel from the outside world kind of gets stopped. And this can be really challenging when people first come to ashram, because they think they're not appreciated, or they think that they are working for nothing, right? And it's just this misunderstood perspective. Because the ashram cuts off this energy flow to the ego has to take stock of where it is and what it is and where it wants to be. And as a yogini, as an aspiring sannyas, we want to be able to go, okay, this is not where I want my ego to be filled. This is not where I want my personality to be nourished from. So I have to turn around and go inside, right? And when I go inside, I realize that when the personality shines, it's not the personality or the ego that is shining. It's the energy moving through the ego. It's the energy moving through. It's coming from the master of the house to the butler through the front door. And that energy is coming from the divine. Now, in our lineage, we would say that that was Sri Swamiji, right? Because it is a point of focus that we can actively surrender to. But in essence, it's actually pure consciousness or Paramatma. But sometimes the ego can get, that's a bit lofty. So it's hard to like hold on to that, and then the ego finds ways for it to actually come back to it. So when we realize that the fuel coming into the personality is from beyond the ego, from the divine, from Sri Swamiji, whatever you want to label it as, you realize you don't actually know how to plug it in. You don't know how to make that energetic connection. And that energetic connection is done through humility, it's done through surrender, and it's done through service, which are the light tendencies of Manipura Chakra. And those tendencies, when we focus our mind, because the Manomaya Kosha is connected to Manipura Chakra, when we focus our mind on how can I be in this action with this person, sweep this floor, do this thing, from focusing my mind on humility, on surrender, on service, then what happens is a stream of energy comes through us, and things start to flow in a way that we've never dreamed possible. And this is the magic of Karma Yoga, because Karma Yoga is taking the knowledge of yoga into the experience of yoga. And for that to happen, you need to learn the practices and the techniques of disconnecting this fuel cell and reconnecting this fuel cell. And the embodiment of that is the accurate practice of Karma Yoga. Does that help?
Yes. And so you're shining because it's coming from the inside to the Jiva Atma and from the divine.
Yeah, it's coming through you, not from you. And so by the time you've experienced any grace or any blessings moving through you, first of all, I know that this is happening when my ego's perspective is like, wow, that was magical. I have no idea how that happened. That was so fun. I can't believe how that just flowed. Like, I'm not the doer at all. I have been part of something, but it has not come from me. It's come straight through me. And when you experience that in a group of people, like we do in the yagyas every year in Rakia Pete, that magic is so inspiring that is actually what fuels us when we come back to Canada. That is what keeps us going to strengthen this opening. And another way that this stays open and stays open for longer and stays connected in this crazy, wild Western world we live in is mantra. Because that is the frequencies that actually keeps that line open. And so that is how the personality shines. That's how the being shines. It's because the frequency of light that it has drawn to for inspiration, for solace, for its life force energy, that is what makes the jeweled city sparkle. It's because it's coming through, not from.
And when we have our minds on humility, that's what opens up.
Yeah, right? So
Ourselves
it's like
to more of the
humility.
divine.
It's not the doer, it's service, it's surrender. But what are you surrendering to? What are you acting in humility to? What are you humbling? What is actually being humble, and what is it being humble to? These are questions that have to be asked internally, and answers have to be experienced internally. And I can say that when those glimpses come through of who is humbling itself and what is it humbling itself to, it's the most beautiful experience of life for me thus far, is to feel that grace. And in yoga and in the Ramacharita-manas, if you read that book of the story of Ram and Sita and Hanuman and Lakshmana, you see that what you're humbling yourself to, what you're connecting to, is the feet. Now remember, the feet is the karmandriya of Manipura Chakra. So for the mind to have to focus on something's feet in itself is an act of humility. And it's the feet of Ram. Many times in the book it says, let everything in my world be gone, but don't let my mind be taken from the lotus feet of Lord Ram. That so long as my mind, my consciousness is connected to the feet of Lord Ram, everything will be okay. And it's the feet because it's the humility and it's the surrender to connect into Manipura, which is your power source. But it's not your ego's power source. It is the power source of consciousness that can come through into this three-dimensional reality.